On the evening of February 12, 2008, in the affluent Kfar Sousa district of Damascus, a woman stood by the window of her third-floor apartment, her silhouette framed against the soft interior light. To any casual observer from the street below, she was Elodie Rousseau, a French-Lebanese artist of modest talent who had moved to the Syrian capital the previous year, drawn by the city's ancient charm and complex light. Her apartment was filled with the familiar accoutrements of her trade. Canvases in various states of completion leaned against the walls, the air was thick with the scent of turpentine and linseed oil, and two placid Persian cats dozed on a worn velvet sofa. She held a palette knife, its edge reflecting the amber glow of a street lamp, but she was not studying a canvas. Her gaze was fixed on a silver Mitsubishi Pajero parked directly across the street, its polished chrome glinting under the night sky. The vehicle was unremarkable, one of thousands in the city, yet it represented the culmination of a 23-year manhunt and one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations ever conceived. Elodie Rousseau was a legend, a meticulously constructed fiction. The woman inhabiting that identity was an operative of the Mossad's Kaidan unit, and the palette knife was merely a prop. Her true instrument was the Pajero, and her purpose was not creation, but the precise and irreversible erasure of a man who had haunted the nightmares of Western intelligence for a generation. The problem, which had festered for more than 2 decades, was a man named Imad Fayez Mugnia. To the public, he was a ghost, a name whispered in connection with some of the late 20th century's most devastating acts of terror. To the intelligence agencies of the United States, Israel, France, and Argentina, he was a strategic adversary of unparalleled genius and lethality. His operational resume was a litany of carnage. The 1983 bombing of a United States Marine barracks in Beirut that killed 241 American servicemen, the simultaneous attack on the French barracks that killed 58 paratroopers, the 1985 hijacking of TWA Flight 847 and the murder of United States Navy diver Robert Stetham, the systematic kidnapping and execution of Western hostages in Lebanon throughout the 1980s, the 1992 bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, and the 1994 bombing of the AMIA Jewish Community Center in the same city. He was the chief of Hezbollah's security apparatus, a founding member of the organization, and the primary liaison to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. He was not merely a terrorist, he was an architect of asymmetric warfare, a pioneer of the suicide bombing as a strategic weapon, and a master of operational security who had remained unphotographed for nearly 20 years. Conventional methods had proven utterly useless against him. Attempts to track him through signals intelligence were defeated by his disciplined refusal to use electronic communications. Human intelligence networks were penetrated and dismantled by his ruthless counterintelligence units. He underwent multiple plastic surgeries, used a constellation of aliases, and moved constantly between Lebanon, Syria, and Iran, protected by a security detail that was fanatically loyal and brutally efficient. For the Central Intelligence Agency and the Mossad, Mugnia was more than a target, he was an institutional failure, a living embodiment of their inability to neutralize a threat that had inflicted deep and lasting wounds on both nations. The stakes were immense. As long as he operated, Hezbollah's global reach and operational sophistication would continue to grow, posing a direct threat to Israeli and American interests across the Middle East and beyond. Profiling Imad Mugnia was an exercise in understanding paranoia as a form of genius. He was not a flamboyant ideologue but a shadowy, methodical professional who viewed the world as a complex board of threats and opportunities. Born in the village of Ter Dibba in southern Lebanon, his formative years were shaped by the crucible of the Lebanese civil war and the Israeli invasion. This environment forged in him a deep-seated hatred for his enemies and an equally profound understanding of clandestine warfare. His rise within the nascent Hezbollah organization was meteoric, predicated on his organizational skills, his tactical brilliance, and his utter ruthlessness. Unlike other militant leaders, he cultivated no public persona. He understood that anonymity was his most effective armor. His operational security, or tradecraft, was legendary within intelligence circles. He compartmentalized information to an extreme degree, ensuring that even his closest aides knew only what was necessary for their specific tasks. He varied his routines with maddening inconsistency, making predictive analysis nearly impossible. He was known to test the loyalty of his own men with elaborate security drills and false flag operations designed to expose leaks. His physical security was layered: an outer ring of Hezbollah operatives, a middle ring of trusted lieutenants, and an inner ring of family members and die-hard loyalists. He moved in convoys of identical vehicles, frequently switching cars mid-journey. His safe houses were chosen for their multiple escape routes and their positions within dense, sympathetic neighborhoods where surveillance was difficult to maintain without being immediately compromised. Psychologically, he was assessed as highly intelligent, patient, and possessing an almost preternatural ability to sense danger. He was not driven by a desire for martyrdom but by a long-term strategic vision of expelling Western influence from the Middle East and establishing an Iranian-backed Shia crescent. This made him patient, willing to wait years to execute a plan, and far more dangerous than a simple fanatic. Neutralizing him required a solution that could bypass every layer of his physical, psychological, and operational defenses. The audacious solution was conceived in a series of clandestine meetings between high-level officials from the CIA and Mossad, held in secure facilities far from Washington or Tel Aviv. The conclusion reached was stark: Mughniya's defenses were too robust for a conventional approach. A drone strike in Damascus was politically impossible and likely to fail due to the urban environment. A commando raid would result in a bloodbath and an international incident. The only viable path was proximity. They had to get close to him, closer than anyone had in 20 years, and do so in a way that would not trigger his finely honed sense of suspicion. The plan that emerged was codenamed Operation Orchard, and its central component was the long-term insertion of a deep-cover operative into his immediate vicinity. This was not a mission for a tactical team but for a single, highly specialized asset who could exist undetectably within his environment for an extended period. The choice of a female operative was a calculated psychological gambit. Mughniya's world was hypermasculine, his security predicated on identifying and neutralizing threats posed by other men. A solitary European woman, particularly one posing as an artist, would be perceived as non-threatening, an eccentric piece of the urban landscape to be ignored. The operational theater was to be Damascus, a city where Mughniya felt secure under the protection of the Assad regime. The obstacles were formidable. Syrian General Intelligence Directorate was one of the most pervasive and brutal secret police forces in the region. The Kfar Sousa neighborhood was home to numerous Iranian and Hezbollah officials, meaning it was already saturated with counter-surveillance. The risk of exposure was constant, and the consequences of failure were catastrophic: the capture and certain torture of the operative, a diplomatic firestorm between Israel, the United States, and Syria, and the further emboldening of Mughniya himself. The plan required a perfect fusion of human intelligence, technological innovation, and psychological manipulation, executed with a degree of patience that bordered on the sublime. The selection of the operative was the most critical phase of the entire preparatory process. The profile sought was not that of a typical soldier or spy. It required an individual with immense psychological resilience, an actor's ability to inhabit a role completely, and a profound, personal motivation that could sustain them through more than a year of crushing isolation and constant fear. They found their candidate in a woman in her late 30s, a linguist and analyst within Mossad's Tsamit recruitment division. For the purposes of the operation, she was given the internal designation Nava. Nava's background made her uniquely suited for the mission. Her family had emigrated to Israel from Argentina in the late 1990s, having lost several relatives in the 1994 AMIA bombing, an attack orchestrated by Mughniya. Her grief was not a hot, burning anger but a cold, dense singularity of purpose. She possessed a quiet, observational nature and an eidetic memory. Her training was tailored with excruciating specificity. She spent 6 months in an intensive language program, not just learning Arabic, but mastering the specific urban dialect of Damascus, complete with its unique slang and intonations, taught by a Druze instructor who had grown up in the city. She underwent advanced courses in evasive and defensive driving, learning to navigate the chaotic streets of a simulated Middle Eastern city built at a secret base in the Negev desert. She was trained to detect and elude surveillance, to use dead drops, to create and service microcaches for communication, and to withstand psychological pressure and interrogation techniques. Her conditioning was as important as her practical skills. She spent weeks in monitored isolation to simulate the loneliness of the deep cover assignment, her handlers analyzing her psychological responses to stress, boredom, and fear. They needed to know, with absolute certainty, that she would not break, not make a single mistake, over the course of a mission where the first error would also be the last. Her motivation was constantly, subtly reinforced, not through patriotic rhetoric, but by clinical deconstructions of Mugnia's past operations, reminding her of the human cost of his work and the strategic necessity of his removal. The construction of Nava's cover identity, her legend, was a masterpiece of intelligence artistry. The persona of Elodie Rousseau, the French-Lebanese artist, was built with the same care as a historical document intended to withstand forensic scrutiny. It began with the creation of a digital footprint. A team from Unit 8200, Israel's Signals Intelligence Corps, built a life for Elodie online that stretched back years. They created social media profiles with sparse, inconsistent activity, reflecting an artist's supposed aversion to the digital world. They fabricated an online portfolio of her artwork on a small, obscure European gallery website, populated with paintings, deliberately mediocre still lives and landscapes, that had been commissioned from actual art students. They created records of her supposed education at a minor art school in Lyon, including forged transcripts and letters of recommendation. A backstory was crafted in granular detail. Born in Beirut to a French diplomat father and a Lebanese mother, educated in France, she was now returning to the Levant to reconnect with her roots and find artistic inspiration. This narrative provided a plausible reason for her presence in Damascus and her fluency in both French and Arabic. Every detail was designed to be verifiable up to a certain point, but to lead any deeper inquiry into a series of dead ends and bureaucratic ambiguities. The physical components of her legend were just as important. Her wardrobe was carefully selected to be stylish but not ostentatious, consistent with a European artist on a limited budget. Her apartment was furnished with second-hand items sourced from Damascus markets. And then there were the props, the elements designed to disarm suspicion and solidify her identity. The two Persian cats were not a whim, they were a strategic tool. They provided a reason for her to maintain a regular routine, buying cat food, visiting a local vet, and made her seem domestic and harmless. Her art supplies were sourced from multiple European countries to suggest a long history of artistic practice. The persona was not a mask she wore, it was a life she had to live, every single day, without a single lapse in character. She was to become Elodie Rousseau so completely that the identity of Nava would recede into a small, cold corner of her mind, accessible only when operationally necessary. Parallel to the human element, a dedicated team of engineers and scientists from the CIA and Mossad worked on the technological component, the weapon. The operational parameters dictated that the device had to be both incredibly powerful and surgically precise. It needed to guarantee the death of the target while minimizing the risk of collateral damage to civilians, which would be a public relations and diplomatic disaster. The solution was a highly directional shaped charge explosive, designed to focus the blast wave into a narrow, devastating cone. The development took place at a joint CIA-Mossad research facility, reportedly the Harvey Point Defense Testing Activity in North Carolina. The explosive material itself was a meticulously calibrated mixture of composition C4 and RDX, with a small quantity of aluminum powder added to enhance the thermal effect of the blast. The team conducted dozens of tests, using advanced computer modeling and physical mock-ups to refine the charge's shape and the composition of the metal liner, a precisely machined copper cone, that would form the hypervelocity jet of molten metal upon detonation. The goal was to perforate the target vehicle and kill the occupant with concussive force and shrapnel from the vehicle itself, rather than from the bomb. The delivery system was equally sophisticated. It was designed to be concealed within the spare tire housing mounted on the rear door of a silver Mitsubishi Pajero, a vehicle chosen for its ubiquity in Damascus. The trigger mechanism was a marvel of redundant engineering. The primary trigger was a line-of-sight radio frequency transmitter, operating on a complex frequency-hopping algorithm to prevent jamming or interception. This was backed up by a hardwired system connected to a nearby observation post. Crucially, the detonation sequence required a two-part confirmation. First, a passive infrared sensor and a short-range Doppler radar, both embedded in the bomb housing, would analyze the target as he approached, matching his specific heat signature and gait, which had been painstakingly mapped from prior surveillance, against a preloaded profile. Second, a live, high-resolution video feed from a microcamera concealed in the head of a screw on a nearby street sign would be transmitted to both the local observation post and, via satellite, to command centers in Tel Aviv and Langley, Virginia. The final authorization to fire would only be given after both the automated sensors and human observers provided a positive identification. This multi-layered system was designed to achieve a near-zero probability of misidentification, a technological guarantee for an operation that had no margin for error. Nava's insertion into Damascus in early 2007 was a quiet, unremarkable event, precisely as planned. She arrived on a commercial flight from Paris, holding a legitimate French passport issued to her cover identity. Her entry into Syria was smooth, she was just another European expatriate. Her first weeks were dedicated to establishing the rhythm of her new life. Guided by pre-mission intelligence, she rented a third-floor apartment in Kfar Souza that offered a clear line of sight to a small public garden and intersection frequented by Hezbollah and Iranian officials. The apartment itself had been discreetly prepared by a Mossad advance team, with hidden communication devices and emergency supplies embedded within the walls. Nava's days fell into a pattern of deliberate banality. She would spend mornings setting up her easel in the garden or by her window, sketching the mundane street life. She made a point of frequenting the same local bakery, the same small grocery store, establishing a familiar presence with the shopkeepers. She spoke a mixture of French and her carefully practiced Damascene Arabic, her accent plausible for a Lebanese woman educated in Europe. She was polite but reserved, friendly enough to deflect suspicion but not so outgoing as to invite deep curiosity. Her movements were a form of passive surveillance. Every trip for groceries, every walk to the park, was a carefully planned route designed to map the neighborhood's human geography, to note the faces, the vehicles, the patterns of the local security forces. She never took notes, never carried a camera. Every detail was committed to her formidable memory, to be uploaded during her secure communication windows, short, encrypted data bursts sent from a device disguised as a digital art tablet. For months, there was nothing. She painted, she fed her cats, she lived the life of Elodie Rousseau, all the while watching and waiting, a predator disguised as prey, her patience the most critical component of her tradecraft. The build-up to the final execution phase began with a subtle shift in the intelligence picture. A high-level human asset, a Syrian military officer with close ties to Hezbollah's security detail in Damascus, provided confirmation that Mugnia was not only in the city but was adhering to a more predictable schedule than usual. He was mentoring a younger generation of Hezbollah commanders and regularly attended meetings in a specific apartment building directly across from Nava's observation post. This was the trigger the entire operation had been waiting for. The Mitsubishi Pajero, which had been purchased months earlier in another country and painstakingly modified, was driven into Syria by a different team of operatives. Its vehicle identification number was cloned from an identical, locally registered Pajero to ensure it would pass any routine police check. On the night of February 11, under the cover of darkness, a Mossad logistics team, operating with a level of stealth that rendered them invisible to Syrian patrols, parked the vehicle in the precise spot that had been identified months earlier through painstaking analysis of local parking patterns. The spot offered a perfect, unobstructed vector from the bomb to the path Mugnia was expected to take when leaving the apartment building. Nava's role now transitioned from passive surveillance to active monitoring. From her window, she maintained constant watch, her senses heightened. The street, once a simple backdrop for her cover, was now a kill box. She confirmed the vehicle was in place. She tested the secure, short-range communication link to the local support team, who were positioned in a separate location to trigger the device. The final piece of intelligence arrived on the afternoon of February 12, the ASEC confirmed that Mugnia was scheduled to attend a meeting that evening, a celebration of the anniversary of the Iranian Revolution, and would be departing alone after his security detail had conducted their initial sweep. The hours that followed were a study in controlled tension. In Tel Aviv and Langley, analysts and commanders gathered in their respective situation rooms, watching the grainy, black-and-white feed from the street sign camera. Nava remained at her post, a silent observer at the fulcrum of a global intelligence operation, her calm demeanor belying the violent culmination that was now only hours away. The moment arrived with a deceptive quietness. At approximately 10:30 p.m., the door of the target building opened. A man stepped out, walking with a confident, deliberate stride that Nava recognized instantly from countless hours of studying surveillance footage. It was Imad Mugnia. He was alone, just as the intelligence had predicted. He paused for a moment on the pavement, surveying the street with the instinctual caution of a man who had survived for decades by trusting no one. Nava's voice, transmitted over her encrypted link, was a model of clinical detachment. She gave the confirmation code, her words a simple, prearranged phrase that belied their deadly significance. Simultaneously, the sensor suite in the Pajero registered a positive match for his thermal signature and gait. In the command centers half a world away, screens flickered with data overlays confirming the identity. The order was given. The trigger signal, a complex pulse of encrypted data, leaped across the short distance to the Pajero's receiver. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, the world outside Nava's window dissolved into a silent flash of brilliant white light, followed an instant later by the concussive roar of the explosion. The shaped charge performed its task with surgical lethality. The blast was focused inward, a concentrated spear of energy that ripped through the rear of Mugnia's own car, which he was walking past, and then into him. He was killed instantly, his body absorbing the full force of the detonation. The Pajero that housed the bomb was largely intact, its rear door buckled, directing the force of the blast away from the surrounding buildings and minimizing collateral damage. The operation's climax was not a chaotic firefight but a precise, technological execution, lasting no more than 2 seconds. Nava's extraction protocol was as meticulously planned as the assassination itself. There was no rush, no panic. Adrenaline was a liability, and her training had conditioned her to suppress it. As the first sounds of sirens began to cut through the night, she calmly walked away from the window. She went to the kitchen and placed fresh food and water in the bowls for her cats, a final act in the life of Elodie Rousseau. She packed a small, nondescript handbag containing a change of clothes, a new set of identity documents under a different name, and a small amount of cash. She left everything else behind, the paintings, the art supplies, the furniture, the entire curated existence of a woman who had never really existed. She walked out of her apartment, locking the door behind her, and descended the stairs. She emerged onto the street not as a fleeing spy, but as just another curious resident, her expression one of mild alarm. She did not look toward the burning wreckage. Instead, she turned in the opposite direction and walked away at a steady, unhurried pace, melting into the growing crowd of onlookers and the chaos of the arriving emergency services. She followed a pre-planned route through a labyrinth of back alleys and quiet residential streets, her path designed to break any potential surveillance line. Hours later, she arrived at a designated rendezvous point on the outskirts of Damascus, where she was met by a vehicle that transported her across the porous border into Lebanon, and from there, out of the region forever. Her part in the operation was over. The ghost who had hunted a ghost had vanished back into the shadows. The aftermath in Damascus was one of confusion and frantic investigation. Syrian authorities, embarrassed by the high-profile assassination in their capital, launched a massive inquiry but found nothing. The explosive device was sophisticated, its components untraceable. The Pajero it was housed in yielded no forensic clues. The artist Elodie Rousseau had vanished, but her neighbors described her as a quiet, harmless eccentric. No one suspected her involvement. For Hezbollah and Iran, the loss was catastrophic. Mugnia was irreplaceable. He was the keeper of the organization's institutional knowledge, its most creative and experienced operational commander. His death left a vacuum in leadership and strategic thinking that would not be filled for years. While they publicly blamed Israel, they could offer no concrete proof, and the sheer precision and deniability of the attack left them without a clear path for retaliation. The long-term strategic value for the United States and Israel was immense. Hezbollah's capacity for conducting complex international terrorist operations was significantly degraded. The operation also served as a powerful message to other hostile actors: no one was untouchable. Politically, the operation was a quiet success. By avoiding collateral damage and maintaining plausible deniability, it achieved its primary objective without sparking a wider conflict. For Nava, the psychological cost was profound. She had lived a lie for over a year, suppressing her true identity to such a degree that reintegration into her old life was a slow and difficult process. She had executed her mission with flawless professionalism, but the act of taking a human life, even one as steeped in blood as Mugnia's, left an indelible mark. The operation raised deep moral and ethical questions about the nature of targeted killing and the use of deep cover assets, questions that intelligence agencies continue to grapple with. But within the cold calculus of national security, Operation Orchard was deemed a resounding success, a textbook example of patient, methodical, and technologically advanced intelligence work that reshaped the strategic landscape of the Middle East without firing a single shot in a declared war. Was the creation and subsequent destruction of a false identity, like that of Elodie Rousseau, a justifiable psychological cost for an operative in the pursuit of a high-value target? Is the use of targeted, extrajudicial killing, even when executed with surgical precision to avoid collateral damage, a legitimate tool of statecraft or a dangerous erosion of international law? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.